So it actually did do it wrong.
What's that?
It didn't update. Well, it didn't update from yours for some reason. So everything else was updated, but it didn't pop in the right way, I guess, for some reason. So
Yeah.
it just didn't propagate or something. I'm not sure.
All right. Well, we're live now, so you're muted.
So it changed it. I'm muted.
Now you're not. You're good.
Oh,
All right.
okay.
Let's ignore the we'll fix it
Well,
in
it changed
post.
it on some, but not on all of them. Then that's yeah. Anyway, what up, everybody? It's Mike and Chad. We're gonna rename the podcast, by the way, but for today, it's still the Art of AI podcast. I'm the host, the talent, the I don't know, the executive producer of the podcast, and Chad's here too. I don't know exactly what he does, but say hello, Chad.
I just sit here and look pretty.
That's what Chad is. He's the pretty guy. Today, if you got the right topic on your feed, is actually who's the actual GOAT, and this actually stems from a conversation that's been ongoing. So it did do it right on some places, because some people are hitting like and it's saying, okay, who's the GOAT? So it only didn't update correctly on some of them. Anyway, I'm the business goddaddy. I'm super proud of my new nickname. I was doing consultations last week, and one of them ended up being with a boy by the name of Caleb, whose mother contacted me a couple of days later asking if I could be his business goddaddy. And now that's my new nickname on everything. I'm going to change everything to that because I absolutely love it. So the GOAT. What does the GOAT mean, Chad? What is a GOAT?
Greatest of all time.
Greatest of all time. So this is a conversation that gets had periodically. A lot of basketball with this one, right? Because we talk, of course, about Michael Jordan, but this comes up a lot when people bring up LeBron James about being the GOAT or the greatest player of all time, especially when he became the all-time points leader for the NBA. Right? I don't know if you know that, but he's the all-time points leader for the NBA.
I did.
Okay, that's cool. Chad's not a sports guy, and that's fine. I'm not necessarily a sports guy either. I'm a playoff sports guy.
I played sports. I didn't watch them. That was my thing.
Here we go.
I'm not a spectator very much. I just watched the University of Oregon Ducks. That's pretty much it, right? Never rains in Autzen Stadium.
So I made a post a few days ago, 3 days ago. And it actually, I'm going to show the post here. So let's take a look at this. And it asks the question: start, bench, cut. And we've got Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, and Michael Jordan. Okay. And early on, I was kind of disappointed with some of the responses that we were getting there, specifically because the responses was like, oh, come on, you know the answer to this.
Yeah, right? Mine was the right answer.
Yours was the right answer. Actually, let's look at Chad's. Let's find Chad's answer here. Let's see. Oh man, that'd be messed up if it didn't show yours.
There it is.
Okay, there we go. Chad says, my opinion is you cut LeBron and Michael, bench Kobe, and put in Bugs Bunny. For anybody who didn't get that, that is what's the name of the movie?
Space Jam.
That's a Space Jam reference because Michael and LeBron have both done Space Jam, whereas Kobe never got an opportunity to ball out with Mr. Bugs Bunny. But then we have answers like, you start 6 chips. No disrespect to anybody in this, right? Start 6 chips, bench 5 chips, cut 4 chips, right? What's the object of the game, right? There's a lot of, this is going to generate some conversation here, right? But I believe that the correct answer here is you cut Michael Jordan or you cut Kobe. Either one of those, LeBron starts, because otherwise you're too small. You cut LeBron, you're too small. Anyway, this conversation is one of many around the topic of the greatest of all time. And I share an opinion that I think Chad shares as well, And that is that the whole argument of the greatest of all time is completely irrelevant and moot,
Yeah.
because the game, especially when it comes to games like basketball,
Or
right?
football,
Or football,
right?
the
Yeah.
game is very different today. So the game that LeBron plays in, right? And LeBron isn't even like a current, because we're not talking about prime LeBron now, right? But if you take the game as it was played during prime Jordan era, and you look at the game that's being played during prime Kobe or even prime LeBron era, those are three different games. The rules are different, the style of play is different, and the level of competition is different, right? So different, in fact, that while there are a few, in my opinion, there are a few players that could do well in different eras, most of the guys who were playing in some of those eras wouldn't be able to play in this era. We had this conversation about golf, right?
Right.
Because I think golf was one of the sports where you brought up what's his name?
Tiger Woods.
Tiger Woods and Phil Nicholson, right?
Yep.
And Phil, for as good as he was, I don't think prime Phil can play with Tiger in that same league. The courses are longer. It's a lot, and I think you said golf was
The
not
sheer athleticism that Tiger Woods brought to golf
right.
was, before Tiger, was pretty much unheard of. I mean, I'm not saying they're all out of shape and they can't walk, all that stuff, but he just changed the amount of intensity. He brought NBA and NFL level of focus and athleticism to golf, where it used to be just a bunch of old white guys, right? And they would be running around, and
Walking around gingerly.
yeah, I mean, it's like, okay, I can stand here and hit a club, right? And that's not to put them down. The sports evolve over time, right?
Mhm.
So there's ways you could look at it. One, who has the biggest impact, right? Michael Jordan at his is had a huge impact because he changed how the game was played, right?
Mhm.
He Air Jordan, and that whole concept was because of how he played the game, the physicality, right? Now, and I'm not a huge, like, don't even bother commenting on how off I am about basketball or stuff like that. I mean, I'll acknowledge that, but in a concept, you know, uh, you know, Jordan changed the game, but now it's more of a drawing fouls, playing the rules game than it was a physical game when Jordan was playing, right? Um, they're trying to weed out all that physicality. And so that
Yeah.
changes the rules and it changes how you have to play the game to be successful. So to compare Jordan to LeBron and even Kobe, I mean, Kobe was kind of in the middle of that shift, and so the idea that one's the greatest of all time becomes a more relative uh conversation, I mean, it's kind of like when you look at inflation in general, right?
Mhm.
Inflation, if I go buy a house now for $100,000, I'm cheaper than cheap, right? And if it's now, we live, in California, for example. So you go to those hot real estate markets, $100,000 for a 2,400 square foot home with X, Y, and Z pool, blah, blah, blah. Then, um, um, but you go to the 1960s and all of a sudden you're buying mansions for $100,000, right?
Right.
So,
These are I saw a clip, like a literal clipping out of like a Sears catalog, right? Like, blew my mind that Sears was selling houses, number one. But
oh
you
yeah,
could buy a house out of the Sears catalog and it was like $3,000 for a 2 bed, 1 bath, nice backyard out of the Sears for a few grand,
right,
right? And you can't get a shed at Home Depot for that now.
right. And to tie that back in, you're comparing different times. The
Right.
job market was different, the value, the number of homes, The supply and demand curve shifted. So in the same way that you can't compare, I mean, you have to adjust for inflation. It's a lot harder to adjust for quote unquote inflation in sports, right? But the same thing occurs. The market changes, the sports market changes. Somebody like Jordan or Woods, Tiger Woods comes along, they change the bar, right? They don't, and maybe that's the indication of whether you're the greatest of all time. Did you change how the game was played?
But
Right.
even that isn't something that you can use on its own just because of the same thing, inflation. Like how much can the game change, right? After that initial, because of course, Michael Jordan wasn't the first guy to change the game. Somebody had to get them to stop using woven baskets, right? And then
Somebody cut. Right.
so like somebody cut a hole in the bottom of one. It was like, oh, now we can shoot from over here, and it falls
Well,
through.
and I think that's it. From my perspective, the it has to be an athlete who changes the game. It can't be rules changed arbitrarily. It's an athlete who drives um, other franchises, for example, in basketball or football, to actually adopt some of the strategies that they've been dominating with, because it's either you know adjust or die, right? um so those are some of the things that you've got to take into account when you're kind of looking at who's the greatest, right? That's again the supply and demand curve. It just changes everything.
Right.
um and the arguments get heated, you know and everybody it's funny because it's the perfect example of somebody trying to find the facts to fit their opinion, right? Like,
Mhm.
I love Michael Jordan or I love LeBron James, and here's the reason he's the best, you know, and you're kind of like, well, yeah, but there's just you're filling your own argument. There's no objectiveness to it.
Well, not to put too fine a point on it either, but there's another space where this argument is happening right now as well. There was a creator who recently, and when I say recently, I mean probably in the last few days, maybe last week, got on the Takati Tick and said that they believe Taylor Swift is bigger than Michael Jackson was, right? And then, of course, people came out and corrected them, right? Like the world is bigger now. So, of course, the numbers are going to be a little bit different. But the world that Michael Jackson existed in was also skewed towards somebody being able to do what Michael Jackson did, right? Like you think about like Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson and kind of what was going on during that period of time. There was no internet, right? So it's not like if Chad, if you and I wanted to put out an album, we could do that today. It might not be very good, right? But we could release an album today. We could record and release it today, right?
Right.
You couldn't do that back then. You had to know somebody who had a studio. You had to spend a ton of money on equipment or have a record deal or something had to be going for you back then. And then there's a thing where kind of tying this in with the sports thing, where there's a story about Magic Johnson inviting Michael Jackson to a Lakers game. And I don't know if you
Right.
heard about this, but I'm sure you can imagine what happened. Long story short, they ended up stopping the game so Michael Jackson could get out
Oh, really? I
because
didn't know that.
nobody's paying attention to anything happening on that floor when Michael Jackson walks in.
Right.
Right? It's like there's pandemonium. There's just nobody's crying and spilling out. Well, maybe people cry, right? I'm not going to take that away from Taylor Swift. She does create music that connects with people, and people cry. That's the whole point of art in some points, right? To make that emotional connection. So that does happen. But have you seen people like falling out all over themselves, passing out, like literally going crazy over Taylor Swift, the way that they were doing it for Michael Jackson? Taylor Swift can go shopping.
Well, yeah, but again, it's a matter of again, the environment's changed, And I'm going to use it's not really inflation, but I'm going to use the term inflation so that we kind of understand that historical shift in how the market works and the value of things in general. We're just going to call it inflation for the sake of this conversation. But they did for the Beatles, they did for Elvis, and then they did for Michael Jackson. But what's shifted between Michael Jackson and Taylor Swift is the nicheness of the market, right? So now I don't, what did you when Michael Jackson debuted and pretty much his entire career, when you would put out music, what did you try and do? You tried to get radio play, right?
Right. You had to play on the radio.
Exactly. So there's this, this funnel effect that happens, that so few people make it through the radio gatekeepers, that now once you get through, you're played on multiple radios. One radio does it. There's this domino effect, and all of a sudden you're everywhere. And there's this cultural touchstone. And just because you're the only game in town as far as on the radios, then you became bigger and bigger. Now, the environment that Taylor Swift is in right now, I can go listen to some obscure ska band from San Francisco and never listen to a Taylor Swift album. And I don't need a radio to tell me what to listen to. I don't have to look for a genre-based radio station. I can create basically my own radio station / playlist, right?
You never have to listen to anybody if you don't like. I don't even remember the last time I've listened to terrestrial. Actually, you know what? I drove the work truck this weekend and listened to some terrestrial radio.
I only do it when for some reason my phone is disconnected and the XM radio is not switched.
I'd rather listen to a podcast. I have a USB just for that.
The point is that it's that environment is gone, right?
Because things change.
Yeah, things change, and it's hard to compare, because you can do it by sheer album numbers, but are album numbers like, how do you compare how often Taylor Swift gets streamed on Spotify versus how many albums were sold?
How many people walked to the corner record store to buy a Michael Jackson album? Right. Because if the numbers are even now, they're not even.
But even if they aren't even, she doesn't have the opportunity. Nobody buys music that way anymore. Right. Other than buying something on iTunes or Apple Music or any of the other purchase, most people aren't even interested in owning music. They just want to listen to it when they want to listen to it. The thing that drove album sales is the only way I can listen to Michael Jackson when I want to listen to Michael Jackson, because I'm not always in the mood for Michael Jackson, is to get the album myself and put in the tape when I want to listen to it. Now I just go to Spotify, type in Michael Jackson. I can create my own album based on, I want to listen to this song. I like this song with this song with this song. Now I've got basically my own album to listen to. And so in that vein, in that sense, that's why the greatest of all time is really a difficult thing to actually evaluate. In fact, I would argue that it's not possible, right? That there is a certain point that you could say, from this point to this point, LeBron James was the best, and this is the reason why, right? But to compare LeBron, it's like apples to oranges, right? And the point is that it all depends on how you look at it, right? And that brings us back to in the shift of the market. Markets are always shifting. Business is always changing. And you can make anything, you have to give meaning to the metrics. Somebody gives you Facebook ads and says you had 1,000 clicks off this Facebook ad. Great. How many deals did you actually get out of that? Right. How many did you close? Because at the end of the day, you're not making money off clicks, unless you're a YouTube creator. And I'm not going down that route, but I'm just saying, as an average business who has a product or service to sell, you're not going to just, you're not making money off people viewing what you're doing, right? You need them to click through and get interested and all that.
There has to be value in what it is that you're actually doing.
Right. But those are metrics that are very popular, right? Like, hey, look at, you've got all this exposure. Well, you know how many times people are like, hey, give me your free product and I'll give you tons of exposure. You know how many times those actually turn into deals? Zero, right? Because they're not,
Well, I don't
that's,
know if the number's zero. Somebody buys stuff. Somebody's buying something.
but it's not typically because of exposure, right? Like, I mean, exposure is a McDonald's play, right? Exposure is a, uh, and what I mean by that is, you know, just because somebody's going to give you exposure, you're going to get exposure. That doesn't fill the end of that pipeline, right? That gives you, okay, people are aware of you, but now how are you going to get them over to the hump to a customer, a paying customer, right?
Right.
And that's all because of how people look at the metrics, how they're staring at the data, that what data they're looking at. If you look at album sales for Taylor Swift, I don't know that they really hit the level of, say, Michael Jackson. At the same time, would Michael Jackson have sold as many albums as Spotify was actually available at the time? You know,
I can say probably not.
right.
Because we arguably have people in who occupy the space that Michael Jackson occupied in that pop R&B kind of space who are more talented, and I'm probably gonna get like some phone calls or some nasty messages about saying that, right? Because I love Michael Jackson. I'm more of a Prince guy, but I love Michael Jackson. But I think that today we have artists who are arguably at least as talented as Michael Jackson. I'll say that when it comes to songwriting, performing, the dancing, the vocal talent. Don't get me started on people who can actually play instruments, right? And they're not as big as Michael Jackson. They didn't have the cultural impact that Michael Jackson has had,
No. And
right?
not to
Because
take
it's
anything
already
away
happened.
from, but not to take anything away from how the impact that Michael Jackson had, but um, you know, the world's changed.
Right.
Not as many people are going to be exposed to any individual artist like they were. I mean, I listened to a heavy metal band called the HU from Mongolia, right? I love them. They're awesome.
That's a great name.
Yeah. Yeah. And the point is that, you know, they're obscure, right? They're not, I mean, they're a little bit higher profile. They're not like some band nobody's ever heard of, and they've had some interesting collaborations, but the point is that's taking my listening time, right? From somebody like a Taylor Swift or somebody else, you know,
Right.
that I could be listening to. And that's where that cultural touchstone seems a little diffuse to me, because everybody's able to go into their own little niche interests now. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just the reality
Right.
of it.
No, that's just
It,
what it is.
it,
That's why
and,
the
and
Beatles
so,
were so big,
so
right?
to compare greatest of all time between, say, a Michael Jackson or a Taylor Swift, and I'm not arguing one way or the other. This is not about that. It's about, once it's changed, how do you measure that, right? And once the market shifts, how do you measure your efforts, right? It's the same kind of thing.
Right. I was bringing up the Beatles, right? Because they hit American shores at right around the same time that broadcast television did, right?
Yep.
And so the American public is now this is like the first time most Americans ever saw a British person, and they looked so weird with their bowl haircuts, and they talk funny and all that sort of thing. I'm not taking away from their talent. They wrote some beautiful songs. Like they really truly did. But does that happen today? No. There's not pandemonium over any bands, really. Not like there was then. A lot of the Korean boy bands are doing really well in that respect, where they have, you know, the girls are going crazy over them because, you know, for whatever reason. But I just don't think we have that type of impact. And it's a similar thing that happens, you know, to kind of segue into something else here. It's a similar thing that kind of happens with the efforts that you might be putting into your business, right? Where if you were running Facebook ads back in like 2012, 2013. Oh my God. 2015, you were a genius. I I accidentally said that, but that is a pun because Billie Jean's marketing was actually running ads then, and they call themselves geniuses. And not to take anything away from them, but the timing was great because that was a blue ocean situation, and people the only way to get attention for your business back then was the same stuff that always had existed: newspaper, which was less effective than radio, which was less effective than TV. You sprinkle in some billboards, and that's pretty much what you have to get your business attention. And now here come internet ads with targeting. And it's like it changed the world. Now everybody can run Facebook ads. So how do you get that attention? How do you carve out your niche? How do you get like clients and customers and prospects? How do you get them Michael Jackson excited over your offer? I don't know that you can really.
But
right?
But the difference is it's like you're right. You can't get as many people, but now you can find the right people a lot easier. So
Right.
the reality is that you can target your Taylor Swift fans or your Michael Jackson fans, to use those as business analogies. Like if you're trying to, if you're running a business where you print Michael Jackson t-shirts, you go find Michael Jackson fans and advertise to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And give your offer, pitch what you think it's worth and how wonderful you have. And these t-shirts are the greatest. And, 10% goes to one of Michael Jackson's favorite charities, whatever the pitch is, but you're targeting them specifically. So yeah, you don't have to go to a billboard. I mean, think about how geographically restricted billboards are, right? It's not only locally based on city and state, but it's also based on what street you're on and whether or not it's in a place that somebody's going to see it. Like if I'm driving by, I'm not paying attention to billboards if I'm the driver, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you got to figure out who's typically driving, what time of day they're driving, where does that, that's targeting for you, right? That's what you're trying to do. But the thing is, you make that wrong commitment and you don't get any results out of it. It's hard to pivot. Because you put it, those billboards aren't like, yeah, we'll try it for a month typically, you need to be able to just make that shift. And you can with digital ads and digital outreach in general that you couldn't before.
Right. That's a fact. So that's all I got, man. There is no GOAT.
Agreed. There's no GOAT.
There's no GOAT. There's people who did impact the game. Talking back about basketball, I think that I don't know that there's a face of the league right now. So if LeBron James retires, who's the guy?
Around here, because I'm in the Bay Area, LeBron James isn't the face of the league. Steph Curry
is the guy. You're right.
Like everybody's talking about LeBron James, and I'm like, I love watching that. I love watching Curry play, and I'm not a real huge sports watcher, but I love watching him play. And that's, again, he's, as far as I'm concerned, he's the face of the league, right? Because
I don't think he gets enough credit. I think that his game, he gets more of a team game type of label on him. Plus, even though he's great in the paint, he's not backing anybody down. He's too small, but he's that distance threat, that pull-up jumper threat from anywhere in the gym.
He's a distance threat, but I think people underestimate his leadership. Like I would argue that his leadership in making the plays happen, again, I'm limited in my understanding in basketball, and I'm sure somebody can argue around me, but he's able to open up plays for other players. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, he's not going to get as many scores, but he created the opportunity. right? And there's a huge value in that kind of leadership, right? Which is a whole nother podcast, the value of leadership in an organization. But how is that not the greatest of all time, right? So the metrics change. Again, you're looking at different metrics. And at the end of the day, it's what matters, what metrics matter in the results for your business or for what you're doing, right? Because to measure the greatest of all time, well, you could put a phenomenal player that carries the team on his shoulders like LeBron. But does that mean he's the greatest player? Or is that it versus, say, a Steph Curry who builds a dynasty around him, right? Or has this, he didn't build it himself, but he led that dynasty, right? He was the leadership.
No, I agree.
You know what I'm saying?
I don't know how you measure that.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not taking away from LeBron, but you got to give props to Curry too.
Oh, you're in the Bay Area. You're a little biased.
I'm not.
I am biased here.
I'm biased, but I'm trying to prove a point, right? Like I'm not. I can't argue about LeBron,
right?
I
Here's
can't
what I'll
argue
say about LeBron. There's a lot that goes on with that guy, right? But I hear tell that. Do you remember the play-in season, the COVID season?
Kind of, yeah.
The bubble season. Okay.
Yeah. I know of it.
The NBA as a whole and the players, when it came to time to make a decision whether they were going to play or not, they deferred to LeBron James because they were like, if LeBron doesn't play, nobody's watching. So what are you doing? And LeBron was like, we ball. And so they balled. That's who LeBron James is to the league right now. Steph, I believe that Steph is like, here's the thing. Steph Curry did change the game. People hate it. Because if you go try to run a game down at the rec right now, guess what everybody's doing? Still to this day, it was really bad 3-4 years ago.
3-pointers?
Oh my God. Everybody's pulling up. You step across half court, you just got to be ready for it. They're pulling up from there. And they're doing Steph stuff. They're they're doing all. He did change the game in that way where kids are shooting from anywhere in the gym at this point. Right?
Yeah.
So he changed the game. Cool.
He did. But
they were deciding whether or not they were going to ball that season based on whether or not LeBron James was going to. What's up, boy? How you doing? You made it back.
You rolling yet?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's the end of the podcast. We got company now. To close us out here, we're going to do this right quick. Hang on. See if you can hear this. No, Michael Jackson. All right, for the Hour of AI podcast, I'm Mike. Dad, any parting words?
Dad, ground stars hammer.
We'll see you guys next time.